members, the House is honored to have the presence of Her Excellency Mia Mottley, QC, MP, Prime Minister of Barbados. Her Excellency is on a state visit to Ghana at the invitation of His Excellency Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, President of the Republic. Her Excellency is accompanied to the House by Senator Honorable Dr. Jerome Walcombs, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. Ms. Elise Jordan, Permanent Secretary, Prime Minister's Office. Ms. Donna Ford, Deputy Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. Mr. Hewland Allman, Chief Protocol, Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. Mrs. Patricia King, Senior Foreign Service Officer, Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. Mr. Charles John, Director of Communication, Office of the Prime Minister. Mr. Peter Allen, Protection Officer of the Prime Minister, and other dignitaries. Her Excellency's visit to this House is of great significance to us, as she is the first sitting Prime Minister of Barbados to visit and address this House. Further, Her Excellency's presence as a lady Prime Minister would undoubtedly spur us on in our pursuit of affirmative action for our women in the quest for women political representation and participation in our dear country. Your Excellency, Africa and Caribbean have historical affinity, as the Caribbean is often referred to as the sixth region within the African Union structures. It is significant that we renew our commitment to develop a closer relationship. It therefore gladdens our hearts that Ghana and Barbados are very conscious of the African connection. Your Excellency, being a member of Parliament of Barbados, as we see your presence here as one of our own, coming from the world's third oldest parliament, especially in the year of return, we are more than happy to welcome you and distinguished delegation of yours to this honorable House. On behalf of leadership and honorable members of the House, I say Akwaba, welcome to Ghana, particularly the Parliament of the Republic of Ghana. We are much honored to hear you share your rich experience with us. Honorable members, may I, on this note, respectfully invite the Prime Minister of Barbados, Her Excellency Mia Mottley, to deliver her address. Your Excellency.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I stand before you humble but proud. Humble at the honor being accorded to me and the people of Barbados, at the privilege of being invited to address this honorable Parliament and to address by extension the people of Ghana, our ancestral home. Proud as a Caribbean leader, committed to claiming our Atlantic destiny, this time for the upliftment and prosperity of the individual citizens and not for their exploitation, enslavement, or decimation. When President Nana Akufo-Addo visited Barbados in the month of June of this year. What an emotional, joyous, and historic occasion it was. There are some of you who I see in here today who accompanied him and can attest to the absolute emotion that was experienced on the part of both delegations. Our people literally reveled in the fact that for the very first time in our 53-year history as an independent nation, the head of state of Ghana was not only visiting our nation, but was addressing the combined houses of parliament and by extension, our entire nation. Indeed, Mr. President was the first foreign head of state ever to address the Parliament of Barbados in the 380 years of our parliament. For this year, we celebrate 380 years of parliamentary existence. I say so conscious that it has not always been an auspicious history, and that for too many years it was an instrument of oppression and tyranny, rather than being the tool of empowerment that we now know it to be. As I initially met and embraced your president, I could not help but reflect on how far we, Ghana and Barbados, had traveled on this long and difficult historical journey to that joyous rendezvous. When President Akufo-Addo spoke to the joint session of the two chambers, he said, and I quote, "The welcome that you will find in Ghana is unique and like none anywhere else," unquote. Well, I am able today to attest to the veracity of that statement. The magnificence and the splendor of your beautiful country is surpassed only by the depth of the heartfelt genuineness of your welcome, your Akwaba. The symbol of the Sankofa bird has become quite popular worldwide and is widely known as an exhortation to go back to the past and bring forward that which is useful for the future. I believe that this Akan symbol epitomizes the story of Barbados and Ghana. Our connection is anchored in history and forged in blood. The initial interaction between Barbados and Ghana in the mid-17th century was as cogs in a transatlantic slave trade. We were, regrettably, two sides of an infamous triangular trade of commercial and human exploitation by colonial Europe. Mr. Speaker, you will forgive me if I, for a few minutes, for the benefit of your parliamentary records, for the benefit of the young people of Ghana, for the benefit of the young people of Barbados, if I speak to that history for a few minutes and to give credence to our claim to be returning to our ancestral home. Within less than 1 decade of the British settling and of Barbados being colonized by them, they legislated in 1636 that all Africans would be enslaved. All Africans would be enslaved. Mr. Speaker, by 1660, Barbados became the first fully developed slave economy in the Americas. It was the first colony in which Africans outnumbered the number of Europeans. By that time of 1660, the society contained 30,000 Africans and 20,000 Europeans. Historians widely recognize that Barbados became that location in which the institution of slavery and racism was perfected. The majority of these Africans came from communities known today as the state of Ghana. They were mostly people known as Ga, Fante, Ewe, Ashanti, mostly the Akan-speaking people. They departed Ghana in slave ships from the ports of Accra, Uyambo, Alampo, and Amambu. Cape Coast Castle, which I visited yesterday, Elmina, the Gold Coast, Kita, and Cominton. Barbados then, in its formative years of colonization, Mr. Speaker, between 1636 and 1700, was mostly an Akan-speaking society. For the 200 years of slavery in Barbados, from 1636 to 1838, we have records of 346 slave ships leaving the coast of Ghana for our colony. The first slave ship ever to arrive in Barbados came from Accra in 1641. The slave ship was called the Star, but it was not a star for the Africans leaving. The Star left London and arrived at the Gold Coast. It departed with 299 Ghanaians on board when leaving here. Only 239 arrived in Barbados. This was a mortality rate of 20%. 60 persons died or were killed in the 8 weeks voyage to Barbados. Over the years, in the end, the records show that 52,468 Ghanaians were recorded as having been shipped out to Barbados, but only 44,906 ever arrived on the shores of Barbados, Mr. Speaker. 14% never made it. It is easy to talk about those numbers as if they were simply integers, but those numbers represent your brothers and sisters of your ancestors who simply did not or chose not to make a horrific, uncertain journey. Barbados then was the Caribbean colony with the largest number of Ghanaians. It was therefore a Ghanaian society in large measure in its culture and community identity. This Ghanaian identity was reflected in its politics of resistance to slavery. The Ghanaians led the struggle for freedom. They were the first revolutionary community in modern Barbados. They also set the first stage for the near 200-year struggle against slavery in the English colonies. And why do I say so? The records show that as early as in May 1675, ethnic groups described as the Cormantees, the Ashantis, and other Ghanaians planned a revolt to defeat the slave masters in battle and to take possession of their freedom and of the island and to create an Ashanti kingdom in Barbados. The governor of Barbados, Jonathan Atkins, reported that the revolt was planned by the Cormantees and that the greater number, I quote, from any one country, and they were a warlike and robust people, unquote. The leader of the planned revolt was described as Cuffy, an ancient Gold Coast Negro. Cuffy was to be crowned King of Barbados on June 12, 1675, in a ceremony of the stool. A stool of state was made of wood for King Cuffy, which was then burnt on discovery. King Cuffy's revolt was discovered, and 17 of his organizers were put to death. 11 were beheaded. 6 were burnt alive. And 40 committed suicide before they were tried for rebellion. Before King Cuffy was burnt alive, he and others shouted the immortal words to the executioners, words adapted and adopted by our own Buju Banton in one of his popular songs. But before he said it, King Cuffy declared in 1675, "If you roast me today, you cannot roast me tomorrow." Such was the pride, the courage, and the defiance of King Cuffy, a spirit that was to lay among our people. In 1816, and the information I just shared with you, I would have asked the Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies to share with us, because even in my own country, these recent records are not well known, and today will represent the first popular reference to them. And there can be no better place for me to do it than the Parliament of King Cuffy's origin. In 1816, the enslaved Africans again went to war. This time, it was a bloody battle of freedom that lasted 5 days. The leader of the rebellion was called General Bussa by his followers. It was rumored that Bussa was also a Gold Coast man. Today, I am happy to report to you and to this Parliament, Mr. Speaker, that General Bussa is the first official national hero of Barbados that we established as a tribute to freedom and a recognition that he laid the foundation with his blood and as a representation of others who did so as well for the liberation of Barbadians. King Cuffy then, and other Ghanaians, you will understand when I say therefore, were the first to imagine and plan a free society in Barbados. They were the forebearers of the spirit of democracy, freedom, and justice. And it is appropriate that as I speak, Mr. Speaker, through you and through this August Parliament, that I speak particularly to the young people of Ghana and the young people of Barbados, so that they never forget this spirit of democracy, freedom, and justice for which we have continued to fight for centuries. I set forth, therefore, Mr. Speaker, for you and for our people at home, this history, because it shows the ties that bind us together. And it is my duty to inform you that the story of our ancestral kith and kin in Barbados, your ancestral kith and kin in Barbados, is one of great honor, dignity, and achievement. During the colonial period, Barbados and Ghana collaborated in spite of our being ruled by colonizers in the collective Pan-African endeavors on more than one occasion. But there are two seminal moments that are worthy of recall. The first is the presence at the very first Pan-African Congress in London in the year 1900 by Ghana's representative attorney at law, A.F. Ribeiro, and that famous Barbadian-American David Augustus Straker. And then there was the fifth Pan-African Congress, which was held in Manchester, England in 1945. Mr. Speaker, the representative from Barbados was a representative from my own political party, the Barbados Labour Party, representing a determination for us to be in the vanguard of the Pan-African movement. But equally, the Secretary of the Congress in 1945 was a young man well known to you. His name was Kwame Nkrumah. As we all know, sir, it was that 1945 Pan-African Congress that put in motion critical political processes that led ultimately to Ghana being the first black African country to achieve its independence in the post-World War II era, and to both the Caribbean and the African continent achieving extensive decolonization in the 1960s and 1970s. We Barbadians and Ghanaians, my brothers and sisters, are literally blood brothers and sisters. To the credit of our people, not only did they resolutely resist the oppression, but in an environment of extreme evil, and inhumanity, they preserved their own intrinsic humanity in my country, and with great cultural creativity, managed to carve out and create a uniquely humane, nurturing, and life-affirming society in Barbados. Simply put, our people humanize the vile and inhumane slave plantation society that the British colonialists had established. And we humanized it so well that by the early 1990s, the United Nations Development Program rated Barbados at position number 19 on the UN Human Development Index, thereby confirming that we possess the quality of life that exceeded several so-called first world countries. I must say that even as we seek to move forward, and even as we recognize the power of our parliaments to make laws and to correct wrong things, that we are still faced with the insidious nature of a culture that is intended to dehumanize black people wherever black or blackness is found. And our parliaments, therefore, while we shall be in the vanguard of removing all laws of discrimination, it is the mental emancipation that shall forever always matter. It gives me great honor, Mr. Speaker, to be able to put on record that many have been the critical historical moments at which Ghanaians and Barbadians came together in the development of our respective countries. It would be remiss of me, sir, with your permission, if I failed to mention that many of the outstanding individuals, Ghanaians and Barbadians, who have migrated between our two countries and who have made outstanding nation-building contributions. The roll call of outstanding Ghanaians who have lived among us in Barbados and contributed immensely to our society would include Professor Albert Fiajo and Samson Owusu, both Dean of the Faculty of Law and the Senior Law Professor respectively at our university campus at Cave Hill at the University of the West Indies. I believe Professor Fiajo's daughter was with us today. Dr. Daniel Boma, the Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Barbados as he retired. Mr. Kwasi Ametui, an outstanding orthopedic surgeon, and you will forgive me, Mr. Speaker, if I remember him because he is the only person who ever put a cast on me. And the late Mr. Justice V.C.R.A.C. Crabb, who became the head of our legislative drafting program at the University of the West Indies, and whose daughter continues to be a distinguished citizen of Barbados in the practice of law. And then, of course, there are many Barbadians who sojourned in Ghana and made contributions to a fledgling African independent nation that we think of as our heartland. Preeminent among them is one of the greatest sons of Barbados, our national poet, historian, culture scholar par excellence, Kamau Brathwaite. Kamau spent close to 10 years in Ghana between 1954 and the early 1960s, and credits this lived experience with immensely advancing his artistic development. He is widely regarded as one of the preeminent poets of the Americas. Indeed, it should be noted that when in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, many of the Barbadian national scholars concluded their education at top English universities, they often found that there were no job opportunities available back home in Barbados or in the Caribbean, and many of them gratefully accepted jobs in West Africa, primarily in Ghana and Nigeria. I recall the first and longest ever governor of our central bank of Barbados, Sir Courtney Blackman, being one of those who came to work in Ghana in the 1950s. It needs to be recorded and acknowledged that President Nkrumah, that quintessential Pan-Africanist, gave an exemplary practical demonstration of Pan-Africanism by appointing to his administration the Trinidadian George Padmore, who also had Barbadian roots, as his advisor to the President on African Affairs, the Guyanese T. Ras McConan, director of the African Affairs Center, and the American of Barbadian parentage, Sinclair Drake, who was head of the Department of Sociology of the University of Ghana, among others. I was honored this morning to be able to lay a wreath at the mausoleum and museum of Kwame Nkrumah and to have met his daughter. So my friends, Mr. Speaker, the current generation of Ghana and Barbadians possess a solid historical foundation on which to build our future relationship. And yes, we must be all about building bridges, a comprehensive and holistic relationship that permits us to come together as members of an extended family to reconnect the deep spiritual, cultural, and other ties that bind us together, and to build what should be known as our Atlantic Bridge. We must never make the mistake of only conceiving the relationship in matters of trade and business, however important that is, and it is important. But we must also focus on engaging with each other in every conceivable area of human activity, for it is by so doing that we will develop a substantial, interactive, and interconnected social experience in which trade and business may better flourish, because trust is the essence of the best business practices. I also wish to express my deepest appreciation for the gracious and fraternal embrace extended to me and my delegation since our arrival in Ghana. When your president visited Barbados this year, I truly believed him when he said it was going to be a welcome like none other. But I didn't know that it would even have surpassed my own expectations. So that while history, colonizers, and the ocean have separated us for so long and have made standards and rules that would cause us to reject all that we are, reject all that we look like, and reject all that we would achieve, it is up to us to change that and to make for our children a new reality. The continuous reference, as I said, to black and blackness as a negative statement and white as a symbol of purity is the most insidious form of colonization and exploitation that remains in spite of the abolition of slavery and in spite of the repeal of those laws that discriminated against us. Mr. Speaker, it acts as a cancer of the mind. We have, in our own parliament, transitioned. But I ask us, and I ask our young people, how many of us can continue to allow space in our heads to be leased out to people who do not care about us or who do not have our interests at heart? The image of our young people spending hard-earned money on bleaching of their skins throughout the diaspora, is an action that we must work to get them to stop immediately. It is not only not good for them, it is a repudiation of the beauty of blackness. We have a responsibility to be able to remind them of the words of the late Marcus Messiah Garvey, that we shall emancipate ourselves from mental slavery, and none but ourselves shall free our minds. Mr. Speaker, if you will permit me now, Barbados and Ghana established formal diplomatic relations only in 1994. Our interaction over the last 25 years has always been friendly, very friendly, but never close. And you will forgive me if I speak honestly, for it is the only way I know how to do. We were very friendly, but we were never close. We have now to determine whether we want to be close. And once we establish, as I have this morning, this afternoon, that we come of common ancestry, that Barbados was an Akan-speaking society in the first century of its modern existence, that our values are the same, then it is up to us, the members of Parliament, the leaders of our two countries, those who are responsible for teaching and nurturing our children, be it in the family or be it in the school, to be able to build this Atlantic bridge to which I referred. We will work together, as we have been, in the Commonwealth, in the African, Caribbean, and Pacific groups, in the United Nations. But the truth is that the deepening of the relationship for the closeness that is required needs the constant interaction and the building of trust. And I am happy that over the course of the last 5 months, that your President and I have met at least on 3 occasions, and that as of today, we signed a further 2 agreements. One, establishing cooperation for the delivery of assistance in nursing care to the people of Barbados, and 2, a cooperation agreement between the Port of Tema and the Port of Bridgetown, recognizing that the logistics that worked during that iniquitous slave trade can work today without us having to bring the pernicious aspects of those logistics to bear. That the ships left the Gold Coast and arrived at the first port of call in Barbados in the Americas was something that was established long before us for 200 years. It is up to us now to make it work for the people of Africa and the people of the Americas. I must ask you that what about the other travel? Ghanaians coming to Barbados do not now need visas, and Barbadians coming to Ghana do not now need visas. Having removed, yes, you can come. Having removed the paper restrictions, we must now build, Mr. Speaker, on the concrete bridges to travel. And our two governments must commit, as we do with other industries, to nurture the environment within which our business people will be able to take the risk to travel across what is really the shortest distance. And you will forgive me again if I ask the question, Mr. Speaker, why do we travel from Barbados to London to get to Accra, or from Accra to New York to get to Barbados? When you examine the facts, Mr. Speaker, the bottom line is The distance between Barbados and London is 6,775 kilometers. The distance between Accra to London is 7,337 kilometers. And the distance between Barbados and Accra is 6,555 kilometers. So that it is by far the shortest route to travel. Now, we cannot claim that our colonizers are dividing us anymore. And therefore, it is imperative on us to be able to make the choices that will make the definable difference for our people. Mr. Speaker, I referred to cooperation in healthcare. I referred, I hope, to what shall soon be concluded as an air services agreement with your ministers of civil aviation and Minister of Tourism. But I also want to talk about renewable energy and the climate crisis. I come from a region, sir, that did not start the greenhouse gas emissions, nor do we contribute to them in any meaningful way. But we are on the front line of those greenhouse gas emissions. The picture of the virulent hurricanes Irma, Maria, and recently Dorian serve to remind us of what I speak. The reality is that it is an existential threat, not just to the coral islands of the world, but to the entire globe. There are countries in Africa that in the last 12 months have experienced hurricanes and floods like no other. There are parts of Europe that have seen heat waves like no other time. The fires in California, and perhaps more amazingly, in the rainforests in the Amazon, continue to bewilder us all. And I ask us, at what point will we act with one voice as a global civilization? Because it is not beyond the ingenuity of man to solve the climate crisis. If we can find money for all other kinds of things, then we can apply both money and resources to halt and reverse climate change. While we in the Caribbean and the Pacific, as small island states, may be on the front line of this crisis, make no mistake about it. The impact of the crisis is not only through hurricanes and storms or floods, it is also in crises of groundwater and in the sargassum seaweed shutting down businesses on our coast and making it impossible for fishermen to earn living or for hotels to be able to welcome people to their establishments. It is against that background that our own country, Barbados, has taken the commitment, in spite of being a fossil fuel producer limited as we are, but we have taken the commitment that onshore by 2030, Barbados shall be a fossil fuel-free society at best and carbon neutral at worst. It does not mean that there will be no production by others, but we accept that on 166 square miles, it is impossible for us to do otherwise. As a result, we are committed, therefore, to a complete transformation of our renewable energy sector and to our transportation sector. It will present unique opportunities for investment, and we believe that the investment must not only come from the North Atlantic, but it must come from the East as well. At the same time, Barbados is equally anxious to share with you in Ghana our expertise in the solar water heating industry. We take it for granted. Indeed, there is no house in Barbados that is built now for the last 40 years without a solar water heater. Barbadians, even young ones, don't even know that you can use electricity to to warm water anymore. Barbados is number 3 in the world per 1,000 with respect to the penetration of solar water heaters. And I have had the honor to bring with me to Ghana one of our distinguished sons and pioneers of this industry, Mr. James Husbands, who is here to be able to share his expertise and to see how we can work together to continue the pioneering work of making hot water available to our people. Anyone who knows what it is to take a cold bath at 5 in the morning will appreciate why this matters to our constituents. Mr. Speaker, sir, against the goal, therefore, of these things, we have then to ask ourselves, at what point will we position our people to be able to invest, our institutions to be able to mobilize our savings, to be for one another that instrument of growth to propel us to the next level. Your Minister of Finance delivered, I believe, a budget this week in this Parliament and would have referred to the continued need, as all of us do, for investment. But why do we look north as if we are looking to heaven for manna, instead of looking in front of us to see who stands in front of us? If we look across the Atlantic Bridge, we see ourselves, literally, and it ought to be the position of both countries, both regions. As Ghana is ready to host the Secretariat for the African Free Trade Area, Barbados is that country responsible for the Caribbean community's single market and single economy. And therefore, for both countries, we represent that hub that is capable of unleashing markets and access to other regions because of our strategic locations in each other's regions. I want to remind you that in respect of the financial services sector, this is particularly timely as well. Because for us, we have had for the last 40 years or so a successful financial services sector that is one of the main drivers of our economic performance and growth in our country. For many may not be aware that we represent the second or third most popular domicile for Canadian companies to be able to domicile to engage the rest of the world, because we give them certainty, regularity, transparency, and fairness with respect to a low-tax environment, but also with respect to the rule of law, which is well known to you here in Ghana, because we have the same common law background. Similarly, I am happy that this morning a large delegation accompanying me from Invest Barbados was able to host more than 130 Ghanaian businessmen. There was standing room only in the room with respect to being able to articulate the opportunities for cooperative investment and collaboration between the businesses of our two countries. I remind us, Mr. Speaker, governments do not trade, but individuals and business people do. Sir, there is another exciting collaboration in the area of culture, because all of us know that for young people, movies, video, and games are the new literature of this generation. And I'm happy that enterprising citizens of our country have come together to produce a film, a Barbadian, Ghanaian, Jamaican production called Joseph, featuring Ghanaian and Barbadian actors, and it shall premiere here in Accra next month, and I look forward equally to its being premiered in Barbados. Before I conclude, sir, I would like to use this opportunity to bring into sharp focus the urgency for the peoples and countries of Africa to claim our space, not just economically, but as defenders of multilateralism and of a fair and just international order. Earlier today, we had cause to reflect on the continued pause upon which the reform of the United Nations and the Bretton Woods institutions has been placed, simply because they have done nothing to be able to admit that in spite of the movement of independence over the last 60 to 70 years, that we continue to have an international order that looks like if it existed only before the independence movement began in the 1940s and 50s. It cannot be fair, and it is not just for us to be begging still to have Africa or other regions have a seat at the table, whether in the Security Council or in the other institutions of the United Nations or Bretton Woods institutions. Neither of our regions, whether big or small, can survive without a fair and level playing field that respects the sovereignty of our nations and the diversity of our cultures. The fact that our political systems are different responds to unique historic dimensions of our individual regions, but it does not make us any less eligible to be treated as equals with respect to the development of an international order. Next year will represent 75 years of the United Nations, and we must resist, therefore, at all costs, any attempts to ignore or marginalize the values and rules that were designed to protect the weak and the not so weak among us. The rules that provide for certainty and transparency, but we must push further and insist on the reform that treats to the nations of the world truly as equal and not as first-class and second-class citizens. In a world that is increasingly being torn to the left and to the right, Africa and the Caribbean, into even the Pacific, must appreciate that we must stand together as one bloc in the fight to protect these multilateral institutions, to give voice and to give protection from the arbitrary and excessive actions of some who believe that they are bigger and badder than anyone else in town, as if we are in a cowboy movie. Our collective voices and actions are therefore needed to defend these issues that I've raised with you: multilateralism, the climate crisis, the migration of people, which is still frowned upon, even though we can find it possible to let money move freely, but not human beings that have blood within their veins. It is against that background that I hope that the African, Caribbean, and Pacific Summit will conclude that it is in our interest to stand as one bloc and to work as one bloc and to be that countervailing voice of reason and balance of power. For among us, Africa, Caribbean, and the Pacific nations, we constitute almost one half of the entire volume of sovereign states of the world. We have the numbers, we have the power. It is simply up to us to use it in one strategic purpose and for the people of our populations. As I come to an end, I say simply that it is impossible to conceive that we are about to enter the third decade of the 21st century, and that direct link between Africa and the Caribbean does not exist. I pray upon you, the members of this legislature, to work with my people and my government, to let it not be repeated by anyone else, that there is no Atlantic bridge for our people to cross on their own terms, in their own free will. I also commit, as the incoming chair for CARICOM, that having discussed with your own president and President Kenyatta of Kenya that we shall seek to establish a CARICOM Africa Summit for the very first time, bringing together the leaders of the Caribbean community and Africa, and that we hope that we can do so on the eve of the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting that is to be held in Rwanda in June. It is an idea whose time has simply come, and we must make it happen. Mr. Speaker, there are so many other things that I could speak about, but it is a Friday afternoon, and I feel that I have preyed upon you and your patience long enough. This is but the first step in a renewed journey. This time, it will be dreamt of, it will be planned by, and it will be executed lovingly by the people who come to the task willingly and not by dint of force, oppression, blackmail, or corrupt practices. I take a particular pride, as do all Barbadians, that the greatest compliment made to a post-independence Barbados came from none other than an eminent son of Ghana. And I refer, of course, to your distinguished son, Kofi Annan, the former Secretary General of the United Nations. At the turn of the millennium, he visited Barbados. And in visiting Barbados to declare the United Nations House open, he said then words that Barbadians have inscribed in their hearts, that Barbados punches above its weight. And why does that matter, Mr. Speaker? It matters because we want to be that country that will always give voice to the voiceless, that will always give expression to the values which we hold dearly, and that will work hard while not expecting instant success, but recognizing the virtue of staying the course, for time is our greatest ally. We appreciated yesterday as we visited the Cape Coast and as we participated in the official burial of soil and remnants of our ancestors, that it is the combination of the mind, the heart, and the hands that make for true progress. Or as I said this morning at the Kwame Nkrumah Museum, that it is fundamentally about education and equity. Your own commitment to the provision of free education for your children is one that has represented our own journey. And indeed, my own country had to renew and reinstate free tertiary education when we became the government 18 months ago. We appreciate, Mr. Speaker, that size or money or might, while important, does not define who we are as a people. We are defined by who we know we are and what we believe and what we will fight for. And that is why we have never feared speaking up for the voiceless, or we have never feared saying to the world, as we did when we became an independent nation and addressed the United Nations for the first time, to the father of our democracy, who, by the way, belongs to a different political party than I do, but who said then that we shall be friends of all and satellites of none. It was a statement that all Barbadian governments have taken to reflect the essence of who we are. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, in the spirit of King Kofi of 1675, we shall remain resilient and defiant. Resilient against all adversity and challenges, and defiant of the perpetrators of evil and ill will because we know that the evil and ill will that exists today may not come in the same clothes and garb that it did 4 centuries ago. We remain committed to the spirit of King Cuffy, to the spirit of democracy, freedom, and justice. And it is why we salute your country for being the first in the name of Nkrumah to claim independence as a black African nation from a destructive colonial experiment. And just as your country was the first in sub-Saharan Africa to become that independent nation, our own country, Barbados, became the smallest nation ever in the world to claim independence in 1966 in November. To dare to dream, but always to be determined to deliver. I ask, Mr. Speaker, therefore, that this same spirit, anchored by love of self, anchored by comfort in our skin, shall allow us to be successful in forging our destiny, to build our Atlantic bridge. May the spirit of our ancestors and the love of our gods protect us on this renewed journey. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, for your attention.